I was born and raised in Elroy, Wisconsin, in rural Juneau County. I still have a farm here, and Elroy gave me my foundation, the value of hard work. And your word is your bond, and always treat people with respect. My great-grandfather came from Ireland and purchased farmland in Elroy. And today I have over 1,200 acres, including his farm. We have crops and cattle, even a vineyard.
Happy birthday, dear Bunga.
I am now 75 years young. And it seems just like yesterday, but 50 years ago, I started my first term in the State Assembly. And it seems like yesterday, but 30 years ago, I began my first term as Wisconsin governor. I have been blessed and honored, and I am very proud that we were able to get a lot of things done.
The year is 1966. The Milwaukee Braves are no more. After 13 years and one World Series championship in Milwaukee, the Braves are playing their first season in Atlanta. The man at the service station would pump the gas for you at 31 cents a gallon. He'd also check your oil and tires, and he'd clean the windshield. And mailing a first-class letter would set you back a nickel. In Wisconsin politics, 1966, the two U.S. senators were Democrats, Gaylord Nelson and William Proxmire. The governor was Republican Warren Knowles. He would be challenged by Patrick Lucey. There would be no October surprise, no last-minute revelation impacting the election. Knowles won easily. There would be, however, an early September surprise. It unfolded in rural Wisconsin, and it would impact the state for the next 35 years.
Now, let's look at the results from this statewide primary day. And our boy from Elroy has pulled off what may be the biggest statewide surprise of the year. Tommy George Thompson, age 24, in his first ever run for office, has defeated the incumbent and the veteran politician Louis Ramel. Thompson wins by over 600 votes. Thompson, the recent UW Law School grad, will be heavily favored in November against the Democrat Stephen Baumgartner.
His father was involved in local politics. And I think that really probably is what initiated his interest in politics. I think that, he loved it. He just loved it. He really did. He, like a lot of people, liked making a difference, and that's where he thought he could make his difference.
As soon as Thompson was sworn in, he was all in. For example, when longtime lawmaker Harold Freilich asked the newly elected Thompson to back him for Speaker, Tommy had a request of his own.
I want to be on joint finance, and you can do that for me. And Freilich said, well, your first-year person never gets on joint finance. It's the most prestigious committee. I said, I understand that, but that's what I'm asking. They have subsequent conversations. Tommy holds out, and Freilich finally agrees. And so right out of the blocks, this young 25-year-old is on the #1 committee in the Capitol.
That 25-year-old, by the way, was very proud, perhaps even a bit protective of being just 25. He would playfully remind most everyone that he was the youngest person in the legislature.
Tommy came in 66, I came in a special elections in 67, and the first thing he wanted to know was, what year were you born? And I said 41. Well, what month were you born? He was very concerned that I was going to be younger than he was. I always told him I was more mature, but never younger.
Tommy was known as Dr. No for most of his years in the Assembly, a nickname he earned a nickname deep down he relished.
The Democrats were always in control, and I was always minority leader. I wanted to do things, and I had great ideas, but they'd vote them down. They would not, give my ideas an opportunity to pass.
So Dr. No would use little-known rules or procedures to block the Democratic proposal, and the two parties would then find a compromise. That's just how things were done back then. Disagreements and arguments, absolutely, but no over-the-top vitriol or animosity or name-calling. Democrats and Republicans had a common goal: find a solution.
The leaders in both houses, the majority and minority leaders, are always significant people, and Tommy certainly had a reputation.
I know Tommy had to be the loyal opposition as Assembly Minority Leader, but I always found him, practical especially when there were important things that needed to get done, like the education budget or the transportation budget. But the other issues, they just didn't seem so partisan at the time.
He understood what I could compromise on because he understood me and what I represented and where I was from and so on. And I understood where he was from. So we never tried to talk the other person out of their position because we understood each other's position.
Thompson won 10 consecutive elections in the Assembly, and in those 20 years he attended impossible-to-count parades and church picnics and county fairs all over Wisconsin. He enjoyed meeting voters, certainly, but he was also building relationships with local leaders of both parties. He was building a bridge to his next destination.
He had been a very good leader of the minority, which they were the whole time, but nobody knew the creativity he had. Nobody knew his ideas because he just had to keep saying no to what the majority party was trying to do, and that's why he was given the nickname Dr. No, or he would never come up with anything. Well, he didn't have a chance to show it. But heaven helped the world when he had a chance to show it.
Today I am announcing my candidacy for governor of Wisconsin. I have decided to be a candidate because I believe Wisconsin is a state at risk.
Thompson's decision to run was met with some skepticism, even within his own party. Some Republicans believed he could not win because, for one, he'd have 3 opponents in the primary, and 2, even after 20 productive years in the Assembly, there remained a suspicion that Thompson was not smart enough to be governor.
There were a variety of opinions. You can go back and look at some clippings and think, wow. Some people had some pretty harsh things to say, but in the end, I think he demonstrated the longer he was on the campaign trail that he could connect with people.
The criticism was that Republicans just didn't have what it took to run the government. They didn't have the ideas, they didn't understand the issues in depth, they didn't have solid plans, so we had to work hard to counter that.
Thompson defeated the 3 Republican challengers, defeated the doubters, too, with 52% in the 4-person primary, and that large margin of victory proved to be important.
I think what helped Governor Thompson immensely is that he ran a good primary campaign. He would have collected a majority of the votes in the 1986 gubernatorial campaign over 3 other opponents, and I think came out of that primary with some real momentum.
He needed that momentum because next would come his greatest challenge. Incumbent Governor Anthony Earl was waiting for Thompson in the general.
We both represented a different point of view. Less government, more government, I guess that would be it. Less regulation, more regulation. And those are perfectly appropriate concepts on which to have an election.
Thompson and his team told voters that Earl was a good guy, but a bad gov, and that Wisconsin needed a new leader and a fresh start.
To serve as governor, you must believe in the people, trust their views, and share their traditional values of family, community, and hard work. Tommy Thompson has that trust, and as governor, he'll stand up for the family values that are important to protecting our children and our way of life. By putting our needs ahead of special interests, by making appointments based on qualifications, not quotas, and by ensuring our beliefs are not abandoned for the sake of social experiments. Tommy Thompson, solid, consistent leadership. Tommy Thompson for governor.
November 1986. Wisconsin voters elect a new governor. Thompson beats Earl 53-46.
I think that Tommy was underestimated for a good portion of his years in the Assembly. And when he came into the governor's office, I think there was great surprise by many people that he was an ideas man.
Will you raise your right hand?
I will, sir.
And repeat after me. I, Tommy G. Thompson.
I, Tommy G. Thompson.
Swear that I will support the Constitution of the United States.
Swear that I will support the Constitution of the United States.
And the Constitution of the State of Wisconsin.
And the Constitution of the State of Wisconsin.
And will faithfully and impartially discharge.
And will faithfully and impartially discharge.
The duties of the office of governor.
The duties of the office of governor.
To the best of my ability.
To the best of my ability.
So help me God.
So help me God.
Congratulations, Governor.
Once Thompson got into office, Wisconsin voters would keep him there. His first bid for re-election was 1990, and Thompson told the voters that he had Wisconsin moving forward.
Wisconsin's on a roll, ladies and gentlemen, and the decade of the 90s can be the best decade we ever had. And for those individuals who are naysaying and the pessimists who would like to go back to the 60s, I say to them, get out of our way, ladies and gentlemen, because we're going to lead into the 90s, and we're going to make Wisconsin the #1 state in the nation.
His Democratic challenger was Tom Loftus, Speaker of the Assembly.
He's a politician that wants every vote, and that's a rare bird. And his cheerleading of the state was infectious. Now, a historian might look at it and say, the guy was lucky. He had the 8 years of the Clinton economy. And Tommy spent every nickel that came into the state of Wisconsin.
Thompson won his re-election bid with 58%. However, that does not mean he was happy with 58%. An election night phone call was made to his campaign hotel room, requesting Thompson to come to the ballroom to claim the victory.
And I call up to say, Loftus has conceded, the governor should come down and claim victory. And Jim Clauser's on the phone, he's like, he's not coming down. I'm like, what do you mean? He said, well, I'm trying to calm him down, he's not coming down yet. What's the problem? He said, well, he wanted to get 60%. He's not coming down until he gets 60%. Later in his life, I know he wondered why he wasn't getting 100%. So, I mean, he was convinced that he had failed because he didn't get 60% of the vote in his first re-election.
The governor eventually accepted his victory.
Well, needless to say, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great victory.
The 1994 election featured Thompson against State Senator Chuck Qualla, and by now Tommy was at the peak of his popularity.
We've got people working, the environment is improving, clean air and clean water. And you know something, ladies and gentlemen? That's on the side of optimism. And I get tired of people tearing down Wisconsin because I'm a builder. I believe that Wisconsin is the best state possible, and I am confident that tomorrow is going to be stronger and better than it is today with your help and with your partnership.
The challenger, Qualla, recognized that he stood little chance against the popular incumbent.
Tommy was the iconic guy. It was pretty clear that it was going to be a tough year for Democrats overall, was a tough year for Democrats nationally. And Tommy Thompson was a pretty popular governor. And what I always say about Tommy Thompson is he practiced the politics of addition. He wanted every vote. And I'll never forget going into a small town. I said, well, this will be great. This is a guy who's probably never seen the governor. I sat down to meet with the guy and looked up, and right behind his desk was a picture of him shaking hands with Tommy Thompson, and Tommy Thompson giving the big check for whatever it was in the community. And that was kind of the way it was.
Tommy collected over 1 million votes in that '94 election, 67%, and he became the first person in state history to win a third four-year term as governor. In what would be his final election for governor, 1998, Thompson was challenged by Ed Garvey, former Deputy Attorney General. And his campaign believed that big money in politics was Tommy's Achilles heel.
Nobody was willing to run against Tommy Thompson when they knew that whatever money they raised to support a gubernatorial race, he could raise times 10, right? So we made money the central issue of the campaign because, of course, where money influences decision-making in government, it influences everything that matters to all the voters.
That strategy failed. Thompson got 60% to win a record fourth term. And in his four elections, 86, 90, 94, and 98, he earned nearly 4 million votes, including many from voters who would not normally support a Republican.
He made huge inroads into the Democratic vote, the liberal vote, the youth vote. He won Dane County once, which is pretty mind-boggling. He not only won Milwaukee County 3 times, but he won the city of Milwaukee. I think he's the only Republican in a governor's race over a 70-year period to win the city of Milwaukee, and he did much better than other Republicans have done, if you look over the last 30 or 40 years, with African American voters and Hispanic voters.
The motto, I think, of the administration was get it done. We would come in to the governor's office and say, okay, we've talked to everybody in the department. They say there's no way you can do this, you can't do that, you can't do this. And he would lean across the table, pound and go, get it done. And that would be about all the direction we had. So you'd be 20-something and you were told, we need to get it done. And the bureaucrats have told us it's not possible. We got to start talking to other people. And new avenues of information came in and ways that we could get things done.
Get it done. Not exactly powerful political prose, but for Thompson, it worked because it was genuine. It was what drove him. If he believed it was good for Wisconsin, he was committed to get it done. There was Badger Care. There was enormous investment in expanding the UW system, upgrading tech schools, improving K through 12. There were over 90 tax cuts. The income tax rate was sliced from 7.9 to 6.5. His environmental stewardship program purchased and protected hundreds of thousands of acres all over the state. He first endorsed and then later signed the $300 million renovation of Lambeau Field. And Miller Park was built.
And we worked very closely with the governor, meeting Saturday mornings in the basement of the mansion with him. And he really worked to think this through. And as history shows, I mean, it squeaked through in the middle of the night on a last-second desperation effort. But that would not have happened without Tommy Thompson. And I think Milwaukee is much better off, not only from the standpoint of baseball fans, but this community is much better off because Miller Park was a successful piece of legislation.
Support some or all of these or not, and some most certainly did not, they got done. Even though for most of Tommy's tenure, the Democrats controlled the legislature. Yes, Thompson needed to work with Democrats, as he did in his assembly years, but he also wanted to, because he believed it was the most effective way to govern.
And a lot of Democrats felt that they have never been treated as nicely by me as even their own Democrat governors. They could always come in and talk to me. And since I knew the legislature and knew most of them by their first name and had served with them, they felt very easy to come in and say, oh, Tommy, how are you, and let's sit down and cut a deal. Tell me how far you can go. I'll tell you how far we can go. And then let's take a look at it and find out if there's a compromise in between that both of us can go and say, we support it. And that's how we were able to do it.
He was a good politician, and I say that term in a complimentary message. Now, he was a Republican governor when the Democrats controlled the Senate. So he had to act with us in order to get his budgets passed.
And he came in from the Assembly as the minority leader as Dr. No. And when he came to be governor, he had to get to be Dr. Yes. And he had to have people come along with him or he couldn't get anything done.
Well, I met with Governor Thompson 3 or 4 times a year just as an update of Kenosha County. And we kept in communication. And when there was something that we wanted to get done, and if he concurred, he'd have the appropriate staff people work on it, we'd get it done because it was the right thing to do. Party lines didn't stop good ideas with Tommy Thompson.
Not all negotiations and debate occurred 9 to 5 inside the Capitol. No, some of the most effective discussions occurred after hours, inside Madison's restaurants and bars.
It was an era when they got their legislative work done, a lot of them would go out afterward. They'd go out to the bars, or they would see one another at political events, and it wasn't so rigid ideologically as we're divided now. And it might have been one of the reasons that they got more done.
I would walk into that Capitol, and we spent numerous days there. When Mom was a teacher and she'd have days off, oftentimes Dad would bring my sister and my brother and myself to the Capitol. And I mean, it didn't matter. Nobody was worried about if we were Republican or Democrat. We knew everybody up there, and that was really important. So you had people that were sitting down and working together and getting things done and oftentimes compromising. And then at the end of the day, they could go out and have a meal together. And that doesn't happen.
The governor's Get It Done list is highlighted by a big 3. The debates were heated because everyone recognized that this Tommy trifecta were bold and innovative programs which would dramatically change the face of Wisconsin. Like him or not, like them or not, these 3 got done on his watch. And he needed most every ounce of his political savvy. He spent most every dime of his political capital to do it. Tommy Thompson made jobs his platform, his priority, when he first ran for governor.
We got to make sure that we have a job climate for all of the people. We have to create that elevator of opportunity so that every man, woman, and child in the state has the opportunity to be able to do whatever he or she wants to be able to create themselves and have a job, a meaningful job, whether they be a college graduate or a high school graduate or graduate from the vocational school.
Thompson called for more jobs, better jobs, and a wider variety of jobs, because at that time, too many jobs were leaving the state.
It wasn't a friendly state to do business in. It wasn't on the top of the list for corporate CEOs either to relocate here or to expand here.
There were signs in those days that large companies in the state were putting up saying, when the last company leaves Wisconsin, please turn off the lights. He was speaking to that.
So from day 1, term 1, the game plan never changed.
You make sure they understand that government will work with business. You make sure that they understand, the corporate CEOs, decision makers, that they understand that they're important, they have a voice in how they ought to run their businesses in the state of Wisconsin. And you have to feel welcome, and you have to have a tax climate and a manufacturing climate that will make them not only come to Wisconsin, but stay here and create more jobs for the next generation of workers.
The governor knew that in order to get businesses to come here, he had to go there. He went to other states, focusing especially on neighboring states.
We're moving ahead, and it was very, very nice again this week to have the P.A. Bergner Company announce that they were going to bring their corporate headquarters from Chicago. They just consolidated, and they're going to bring their headquarters from Chicago into Milwaukee.
Thompson did not start and stop with other states, though. He also led trade missions to 27 countries.
I mean, I went with him to Asia, I went with him to Europe. I saw how aggressive he was and how the companies responded to him, both Wisconsin companies and overseas. There were a lot of jobs created by companies that went to Democrats, Republicans, and independents that were generated because of that energy and that effort.
And each trip had the same goal: add Wisconsin jobs, increase Wisconsin exports, and encourage foreign companies to move here.
I think there was apprehension in the past that people would look at trade missions as junkets, but he had an instinct, and he invited legislators to go with him on all of his trade missions at the time I was there. And that if people saw that there were results, that they would buy into it, and his instincts were right.
Thompson did most of his work on jobs, of course, here at home. Literally everywhere here at home. He visited every county, talking up business, talking up jobs.
I don't know, the first 4 years he created, 250,000 jobs? Something in that magnitude. He was very active in pursuing business, whether it be big business or Mike's flower shop.
Politics, people, and policy. Those things blended together. Plus, he worked tremendously hard. I mean, the guy was all over the state. We grew in, not only in jobs, about 800,000 jobs created in that period, but we grew in just the gross product of the state faster than the rest of the country.
And because it meant new jobs or better jobs, the work of this Republican governor even included becoming a friend to labor.
I honestly do not believe labor was better under any governor other than Tommy Thompson, because he understood that it was the working class, the middle class, that drove the economy. He was always there for the blue-collar worker.
In order to either keep jobs in Wisconsin or bring jobs to Wisconsin, the governor was involved every step of the way.
He was our closer. You know, we'd pitch the first 7, 8 innings, and Thompson would always close the deal. And that was, that's something that my peers in other states didn't have. They didn't have a governor that engaged in the economic development process. There's frankly nothing more powerful than a governor making the close.
There was a business that was looking at Wisconsin, and they truly said, okay, we're going to look at the site, but we don't want anyone there from the state. We're just going to come look at it ourselves. We want to just talk amongst ourselves. So, of course, he masterminds the idea that, well, I'm going to have a cell phone in the room with the property they were looking at, and I'm going to have an aide with binoculars way up, far away, watching that when they walk into that room, they're going to let me know that I need to call that cell phone. And then, of course, say, this is Governor Thompson. We want you to move to Wisconsin. He always found a way.
Wisconsin's economy went from bleak to booming in Thompson's tenure. Job creation increased 39%. Unemployment hit a record low, 2.9. Businesses moved here, stayed here. Jobs were created here. Most every economic indicator improved in his 14 years.
He took it very personally. He was as home with a carpenter or a bricklayer as he was with a CEO. And those were the folks he, I think, at the end of the day, cared about. It didn't matter Democrat, it didn't matter Republican. He really wanted to have that kind of prosperity shared by all. So it was his passion.
Governor Thompson once had a few minutes to spare before a speech in Milwaukee, so he instructed the driver to take him through an inner-city neighborhood. Because for Thompson and welfare reform, it was always only a question of how. It was never a question of why.
Tommy says, pull over. And he turns to me and he says, see that guy over there with the red baseball cap, that young African-American young man? Yes, Governor. He said, he could be the doctor who cures cancer one day. And then he turns and he looks and he sees another young guy and he says, see him? He could be the first black United States Senator from Wisconsin. Well, Tommy had a story or an idea of potential for everybody who was hanging out on a street corner that morning. Tommy and his gift was a compassionate desire to see every person, man, woman, and child in this state succeed. But he understood there were obstacles to success.
Thompson believed in the dignity of work because of his own work ethic. His first job was in his dad's grocery store at the age of 5, and he's been working ever since. So when he became governor, he was frustrated, angry even, that generations of Wisconsin families were locked in a welfare trap.
We would talk about a lot where, hey, the only thing the government made you do was promise to stay poor, and if you had more kids, would give you more money. And the last thing you ought to think about doing is going to work, because if you do, you're going to lose everything. And so what did people do? They took us up on it. And I think he had I would say it's not rocket science. It was a basic core foundation of principles of what was right and what was wrong.
The governor repeatedly met with welfare moms inside the governor's mansion. It was with them in his home where he found a solution.
We would talk, and then finally I'd get them to open up. And out of it, came certain stories. They said, I said, why don't you work? And they said, well, if I go to work, I'm going to lose my health insurance for myself and my children. I can't afford to go to work. I said, that makes sense. What if I give you health insurance? Well, he said, that'd be great. But I dropped out of school. I got pregnant when I was 14, and I don't have any skills. I said, well, okay. So what if I provide vocational training for jobs that are out there in the healthcare field and allow you to go to school for a year, 2 years, and get training so you can get a job? Oh, that'd be great, but who's going to take care of my children? I didn't know where this was going to end. I said, what if I provide daycare for you? And they said, fine, I'll go to work. So we reached a compact. And what compact was basically, I would provide health care, daycare, education, and transportation if they would go to work.
On the surface, that agreement was hardly the action of a supposed conservative governor.
Subsidized health care, subsidized transportation, subsidized child care, training for a job, and in some cases, a subsidized job. And if you think about that, that's the ultimate government intervention in somebody's life. But he understood that the end game was a conservative principle. Everybody who can work should work.
The system at the time, AFDC, had been around for decades. Special interest groups were very comfortable with it. Plus, because of the large number of African American caseloads, accusations of racism were common. Indeed, this would be a hard-fought and divisive debate.
I would go home at night and say, why am I doing this job? It's like, I was coming up against my friends, people who I knew for a long time, and having huge battles with them over issues, over why would we expect people to work? Why wouldn't we expect? It was just, to me, silly stuff that we were fighting over. And I couldn't always understand the battle.
Thompson's solution was called Wisconsin Works, or often W-2, an intentional reference to the income tax form. Those in the trenches with Thompson believed it went far beyond welfare reform. More accurately, it was welfare replacement.
Wisconsin Works philosophically, was brought up and implemented, and it was a complete replacement of welfare in this state. It was very complicated. It was essentially blowing up an entire system and starting from scratch, changing expectations of those who are on assistance, as well as those who were providing the assistance. Like, there was performance expectations for the agencies just as much as there's a work expectation for those receiving assistance.
This woman was a welfare mom in those days. She was raising 7 children. After Wisconsin Works, she's had a job for over 20 years.
Because I've seen a lot of women that by the time their children got 18, they had not worked, they hadn't did anything, and then they were forced to go out into the work world, and they had no training.
Wisconsin and its governor became the national poster boys for welfare reform. President Clinton named Tommy as the co-chair of the National Welfare to Work Partnership. Speaker of the House Newt Gingrich, with Thompson at his side, called for national welfare reform. And leaders coast to coast began to take Tommy's plan and run with it.
So I have always said that I completely stole and borrowed our welfare reform program from Tommy Thompson. So when I became mayor of New York, I talked to him, went over his whole program, and we installed that program in New York City. We took 600,000 people off the welfare rolls, 500,000 people with jobs, And I always say 100,000 people went to New Jersey.
Thompson was also invited to speak to Congress about welfare reform, and he was joined by a fellow Badger. At the time, he was in his first congressional term.
Under Governor Thompson's leadership, the W-2 program has reduced welfare rolls in Wisconsin from when he took office in 1987 of 100,000 families receiving AFDC to February of 1999, 8,865 families on cash assistance. Let me repeat that just for 1 second.
Tommy Thompson took on the entire intellectual case for welfare reform and took on what many people call the poverty industrial complex, the people who wanted the status quo, which we called it back then AFDC, cash welfare. And he was going against a tidal wave of opposition, being called every name in the book, but he knew he was right, and he found a way of connecting with people so that they saw what he was trying to do was good. He ended up winning the moral high ground on the movement to reform welfare.
It began not in Madison, but in Milwaukee. What is now across the country commonly called school choice began as MPCP, the Milwaukee Parental Choice Program.
The schools in Milwaukee were just in very bad shape, and they were so different from the suburban schools that I was just shocked by the difference. And I described it as two worlds separated by 3 miles. The problem came to Tommy. Tommy was the originator. The originators of this program are Polly Williams and Tommy Thompson, with Howard Fuller and George Mitchell and some others in the background.
State Representative Polly Williams had children in the failing Milwaukee school system, so for her this was personal. She and the others not only made the governor aware, but they would also become powerful allies.
When I think about Tommy, he really had a sense of the pulse of people. Even like school choice, you can say he sat and just thought of it. No, people came and said, we got a problem. We got a problem, okay? And really, it had never been solved that way before. So, so to get there, it may not have been his first, he being the first one with the idea, but he wasn't afraid to take others' ideas and to work across the aisle with Annette Polly Williams and say, you know what, and she had her bumps too, because people were saying, you're letting public schools go, what about the union? But even she did the same thing, you know what, for the children.
Now that Governor Thompson knew of the problem, it left him in his mind with only one option: find some way to fix it.
They want the best for their children, no different than you and I. Mother and dads, they will choose the best school. Give them the opportunity and the flexibility to keep their children close to them in the neighborhood, and they will take a part in that kid's school, in his or her education. And that was the genesis of the voucher program.
We believed in parent choice because we felt like low-income and working-class parents in the city should have some ability to choose the best educational environment for their children. Had that Republican Governor Tommy Thompson not been in that seat, that program would have been vetoed.
The problem of inner-city public schools underperforming was widespread and long-standing when he became governor. But you know, other cities, other states either didn't attempt solutions or kind of kept to a very narrow scripted kind of approach, throwing more money at the problem, for example. But Tommy Thompson was an outside-the-box thinker, and so I think that's why he gravitated towards school choice.
Phase 1 of the Thompson Plan, a first-in-the-nation private school choice program, became law in 1990, but the governor wanted more. He continued to push to one day include religious schools.
A black mother with 2 or 3 children came up and said, Governor, can I talk to you? And Tommy's a people person, so he said, sure. They go off in a corner, and she said, I have 2 or 3 children. There's a Catholic school that's within 2 or 3 blocks of my house. I could watch them walk to that school, watch them come home, and I can't send them to that financially.
In 1995, religious schools were added to the choice program. Mesmer High School in Milwaukee, a Catholic school, was the first voucher high school in the country.
we couldn't find a reason that we should say no to kids who wanted a high quality education. And then the fact that we were a Catholic school, we couldn't find a reason to say no.
It started in Wisconsin. It did not start and end in Wisconsin, because now, more than 2 decades later, there are school choice programs operating in 25 states and the District of Columbia.
This small initiative called School Choice has started a educational revolution in the United States. The possibility of poor black children, minority children, low-income children now securing a quality education around the country is all because of something that he started here.
Agree with the items on the Get It Done list or not, and some did not and still don't, most everyone acknowledges that how it all got done was vintage Tommy.
There was Tommy the cheerleader. There was Tommy the builder in terms of infrastructure. There was Tommy the techie. He was remarkably curious about all things in technology and helped lay the foundation for some things that are still working in Wisconsin today. There was Tommy the leader and manager. There was then Tommy the lucky, because he really did, he made his own luck by working so hard. But there were a lot of things about his time that paralleled some great things that were happening in the national economy, but he made them even better.
Tommy Thompson is the longest-serving governor in Wisconsin history and top 10 in American history. And on each and every day, he was the state's most enthusiastic cheerleader. Some may have argued and disagreed with him over policy. Some, even today, may still say, "I told you so," about the merits or impact of one or more of his achievements, but most everyone liked him and respected him and believed that everything he did was because of his love for Wisconsin and its people. Thompson won 4 elections not only because of his policies, but also because of his personality. Wisconsin voters deep down believed he's just one of us.
This is something unbelievable, isn't it? I've never seen it.
There was an event in Waukesha County that I happened to be at, and I was behind the scenes, and this was before Tommy took the stage and spoke. And there were a bunch of county-level volunteers that were sort of standing in a line, and he was just kind of mildly chatting with each of them as he made his way toward the stage. He remembered a personal detail about every one of those people. It was astounding. Hey, did your brother ever get that job at Mercury Marine? Are you still having trouble with your lake house in the DNR? You know, how was your mom's surgery? Stuff like that. It was just amazing, and you can tell that there was a certain warmth and connection where people really appreciated that personal side of Tommy Thompson.
When I came in this office, for me, Tommy Thompson was the example. He was my mentor, still is today. What I learned in the examples you give and others that were a part of his tenure here as governor of the state of Wisconsin, he taught me most importantly, never stop reforming. You know, take whatever political capital you earn from one reform and don't sit back and hoard it, keep reinvesting it. Move on to the next big reform and the next big reform and the next big reform. That kept him way ahead of everybody else. Not only the opposing party, but just the legislature in general, Republican and Democrat alike. We were always following the lead of Tommy Thompson. And in turn, that not only was good for Wisconsin, but on things like welfare and education reform, we led the nation, and in many ways, we're still the leaders today.
If you look at all the other elected officials that have been known to have big picture ideas, this governor has had them. Gaylord Nelson, even going all the way back to Bob LaFollette. This governor has had an imprint on the national scene in so many ways that people tend to forget. I mean, because we've been spoiled in Wisconsin. It's Tommy.
Governor Thompson was the state director for the 2000 George Bush presidential campaign, and after the Bush victory, the president-elect offered Thompson the position of Secretary of Health and Human Services. Thompson, however, loved Wisconsin, and he loved being the governor. He was prepared to decline the Bush offer until he spoke with his family.
At first, I was like, no, I didn't want him to do it because he was the governor, he loved it, we had a great life, and things were going very well. But as time went on, and when he was really considering, when he was actually asked, I changed my mind. My mom and I were talking, we were thinking about when a president asks you to serve, that's a pretty big ask. And where he was in his life and what he had accomplished and what I felt he had to give to the country, I thought he was the right person for the job.
I first got to know Tommy during my dad's campaign for president in 1988. Tommy was not only an effective governor of the state of Wisconsin, he was a tireless advocate for my dad, and my view was anybody who likes my dad, I like. I knew of Tommy's record as governor of Wisconsin, so when it came time to fill out my first cabinet, I thought Tommy's energy, his expertise, and his intellect would make him a good cabinet secretary, and it turns out I was right. You know, I like to give nicknames to people, and I always called Tommy Double T. Double T could mean Texas tough, although he's not from Texas, but he is tough in the right kind of way.
I'm still having a hard time believing that I'm standing here. I come from a small community, as the Surgeon General just said, Elroy, Wisconsin. Elroy is so small that you can call somebody, get a wrong number, and still talk for a half an hour. That's how small my hometown is. I am very excited to be here, and while we face incredible challenges, I truly believe that we're at the beginning of a great adventure.
Thompson was only 9 months into his HHS term when the 9/11 terrorist attacks occurred, including the crash at the Pentagon just over a mile from Tommy's office. The next day, September 12th, Thompson was at Ground Zero. He was the first cabinet secretary on site.
We know about the ones that died, but there were thousands more who were seriously injured, and we needed a tremendous amount of medical help. And he made sure that he marshaled all that and got that help to us.
Thompson served as HHS secretary for 4 years. He was the architect of the Medicare Modernization Act, which included an unprecedented prescription drug benefit. He continued to work in welfare reform, and he updated the nation's defense against bioterrorism. His style did not change. He believed what worked in Wisconsin would also work in Washington.
That might have been what the pundits said and the Washington media and elite, but no one's going to change Tommy Thompson. At the end of the day, his style and him being who he is really proved to be incredibly successful.
I think a lot of people were telling him, as well as his team, that they may have to adjust their style, but he didn't, and I think that's why he was successful at HHS. His relationships and his sincerity and authenticity and just his smart policy sense was able to bring together the president and members of Congress.
Secretary Thompson, with support and assistance from Colin Powell and signed by President Bush, began the Global Fund to fight AIDS, TB, and malaria during his time at HHS. And he visited those with AIDS in Africa every year.
I made everybody on the plane spend the day at a village with somebody with AIDS. And Tommy, my daughter, was with me, and we spent one of the most memorable days of my career with this woman. And she said, I just want you to know, Mr. Secretary, how great America is, because I was expected to die. And when your program started giving me the antiretroviral drugs, I am alive. That this woman was so appreciative of America, and that what we had done with this Global Fund, which we started on that Sunday afternoon with President Bush and Colin Powell, turned out to this story that this woman loves America, and she loved America because she was going to see her 4 children grow up. And I've never forgotten that story. And that's what public service is all about.
Thompson ran for president in 2008, but the campaign, short on cash, was short-lived. It ended after just 4 months. Turns out that Tommy had one more run in him, a 2012 campaign for United States Senate. 3 other Republicans challenged Thompson in the primary, and in the 4-person race, Thompson won with 34%. In the general election, it was Thompson against Tammy Baldwin. The Tommy camp was very confident. After all, he had never lost a statewide election.
He looked at his opponent and said, okay, hold on a second, let me get this straight. Here's a woman who spent her time in the legislature with a relatively shallow list of accomplishments. Resumes against resumes, this should not be a race. And I think that was very hard for him to consider that, even going into the final weeks of the election, that thing should have been close.
Thompson collected nearly 1.4 million votes, more votes than he received in any of his campaigns for governor. But with President Obama on top of the other side of the ballot, the Democratic turnout was heavy. And Thompson lost, 51-46.
You know my dad. He's very optimistic. Never did he have a doubt in his mind that he would get beat. It was hard. It was really hard. It was tough, right? He'd been very successful, poured his heart and soul into it, and it didn't turn out the way we hoped, wanted, but you move forward. It was tough, no doubt about it. Both professionally, private, his family, everybody. It hit everybody, no doubt.
On that night in 2012, Tommy George Thompson closed the book on nearly 4 decades of impactful public service. 20 years in the state assembly, 14 years as governor, 4 years in Washington, D.C.
Tommy Thompson's legacy is he has a very meaningful life, and he used his talents in his life to make other people's lives much, much better. Not just in Wisconsin, but in all of America. And so this is a man who made a huge difference in helping people fix their problems. This guy from Elroy made a major difference in the lives of his fellow Wisconsinites and his fellow Americans.
Tommy inspired an entire generation of Wisconsinites to get involved. I would not have been in politics if not for Tommy. Tommy inspired me to get involved. So there's a whole generation of young people who got involved in this process because they looked at this kid from Elroy making a difference, reforming welfare, taking on issues that you can't take on, taking on causes that you can't take on, and doing it. And all of us would look and say, yeah, if I can do just a little bit of what he's done, it's all worthwhile.
I'm very fortunate. I have been blessed by having 3 wonderful children, who each have 3 children. So I have 9 grandchildren who I dearly love, and they call me Bunka. I'll never slow down until the time the good Lord says, come on home. And then's the time to slow down. I'm on about 10 boards, 6 public boards, and about 5 private boards. I've invested in about 15 companies, which I take a management position. And so I'm very much involved with business. And I also farm. I love Wisconsin. Every time I start out a speech, I say, isn't it great to be from the great state of Wisconsin? I love its people, love its institutions. I love the beauty of this great state. I've been blessed. Been blessed to grow up in this great state, come from humble beginnings, and have the opportunity to be governor of this wonderful state. I love being governor. I love its people, and I love Wisconsin.